Have you ever noticed that certain ideas pull you in, while everyone around you just doesn't get it? You mention quantum concepts, consciousness, or reality being more flexible than it seems, and people either change the subject or look at you like you've gone too far. But for you, these ideas don't feel strange. They feel familiar. Almost obvious. You're not looking for fantasy. You're looking for something that actually explains what you experience. Those moments when reality feels layered, when patterns connect, when cause and effect don't feel as simple as you were taught. And here's what's wild. Most people aren't drawn to these ideas at all. They're uncomfortable with them. They shut them down fast. But you don't. You lean in. Not because you're trying to be different. Not because you're chasing mystery. But because somewhere inside, surface-level explanations stopped being enough. And that creates a quiet question most people never ask themselves. Why does my mind keep going here, when others don't? So what's really happening here? Here's the pattern most people never talk about. If you're drawn to quantum ideas, it probably didn't start with physics books or spiritual content. It started with friction. At some point, the explanations you were given about life stopped working. You did what you were supposed to do. You followed logic. You listened to advice that sounded reasonable. And yet, something didn't line up. You noticed contradictions others ignored. You felt that reality was more nuanced than work hard and everything makes sense. You sensed patterns, emotional, relational, psychological, that couldn't be explained by simple cause and effect. When you tried to talk about this, most people brushed it off. They said, "You're overthinking. You're reading too much into it. Just focus on what's practical." And maybe you tried to do that. You tried to stay grounded. You tried to stop questioning. You tried to accept surface answers. But the questions didn't go away. They got quieter, deeper, more persistent. That's when ideas about consciousness, observation, interconnectedness, and quantum-like behavior started to feel relevant. Not as science trivia, but as language for something you were already experiencing internally. Meanwhile, you noticed something else. The people around you weren't curious at all. Quantum ideas irritated them. Ambiguity stressed them out. Anything that challenged linear thinking felt pointless or threatening. So a divide formed. Not intellectually, but perceptually. You weren't trying to escape reality. You were trying to understand it more accurately. And here's the real problem this creates. When your mind naturally searches for deeper patterns, but the world around you rewards certainty and simplicity, you start questioning yourself. Why do I think like this? Why does this matter to me? Am I just imagining meaning that isn't there? That self-doubt is common. And it's exactly where most people give up their curiosity. But the truth is, nothing has gone wrong with you. What's happening is far more specific, and far more grounded in psychology, than most people realize. Because the pull toward quantum ideas isn't random. It's a response to how your mind processes reality. And once you understand that, everything clicks. So let's break down what's actually going on inside your brain, and why most people never experience this pull at all. Okay, so here's what's actually going on, without mysticism, without hype. Your brain is not designed to understand reality. It's designed to simplify it. From a survival standpoint, ambiguity is dangerous. The mind evolved to reduce uncertainty as fast as possible, even if the explanation is incomplete or inaccurate. This is why most people prefer clean answers, fixed rules, and predictable narratives. And this is where the split begins. Some minds crave closure. Others tolerate complexity. If you're drawn to quantum ideas, chances are your mind falls into the second category. Let's talk about why. 1. Your brain is a filter, not a camera. You don't perceive reality directly. You perceive a filtered version of it. This filtering is largely controlled by the reticular activating system, RAS, a network in your brain that decides what information reaches conscious awareness and what gets ignored. You're surrounded by millions of stimuli every second. Sounds, colors, faces, patterns, emotions. If you noticed all of it, you'd shut down. So the RAS asks one question constantly. What matters right now? For most people, the answer is simple. Safety, a routine, a social approval, immediate goals. Their RAS filters reality accordingly. But when someone begins questioning deeper patterns, identity, meaning, cause, and effect, the RAS starts highlighting different information. Connections, anomalies, repeating themes, contradictions. This doesn't make you smarter. It makes you more attentive to complexity. And once that filter shifts, you can't unsee it. 2. Pattern recognition. The core difference. Humans are pattern recognition machines. But not all patterns are surface level. Some people focus on schedules, habits, rules, outcomes. Others naturally notice emotional loops, a relational dynamics, a timing coincidences, internal shifts. If you're drawn to quantum ideas, it's often because your mind is sensitive to nonlinear patterns, patterns that don't follow straight lines. Quantum language becomes appealing not because it's scientific proof, but because it gives metaphors for experiences that feel real but hard to articulate. It names the discomfort you feel when a cause doesn't equal effect, a effort doesn't equal outcome, a timing feels significant, observation changes behavior. Psychology already understands this. We call it context-dependent perception. The meaning of an event changes depending on how and when it's observed. 3. Why most people reject these ideas. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Quantum ideas don't threaten logic. They threaten certainty. For many people, certainty equals safety. Ambiguous ideas feel destabilizing. They raise questions with no immediate answers. They loosen fixed identities. So the brain reacts defensively. Dismissal isn't intellectual. It's emotional. Saying, "That's nonsense," is often shorthand for, "That makes me uncomfortable." People who rely on rigid mental models feel exposed by ideas that suggest reality isn't as fixed as they thought. So they shut them down. You don't, because your nervous system tolerates uncertainty better. 4. Cognitive flexibility and identity transition. This is where things get interesting. People drawn to quantum ideas are often in, or approaching, an identity transition. Old explanations no longer fit. Old labels feel restrictive. Old goals lose meaning. Psychologically, this increases cognitive flexibility, the ability to hold multiple perspectives without needing immediate resolution. Quantum ideas resonate because they allow paradox, tolerate uncertainty, reflect transition rather than stability. This isn't spirituality. It's developmental psychology. During periods of growth, the mind temporarily loosens rigid structures to reorganize itself. You're not escaping reality. You're updating your internal map. 5. The observer effect, psychological version. You've probably heard of the observer effect in quantum physics. But here's the grounded version. When you become aware of a pattern, emotional, behavioral, relational, that awareness changes your behavior. Not magically, automatically. This is a core principle in psychology. Awareness disrupts autopilot. Once you notice a loop, you can't unknow it. Once you see a pattern, it loses power. That's why people drawn to these ideas often experience discomfort first. Awareness comes before clarity. And this leads to a final insight most people miss. You're not drawn to quantum ideas because they explain the universe. You're drawn to them because they mirror how your mind is changing. They reflect a flexibility over rigidity, observation over assumption, a meaning over mechanics. And once your perception shifts in that direction, surface-level explanations stop satisfying you. Not because they're wrong, but because they're incomplete. And that's where the deeper layer begins. Because this attraction doesn't just explain how you think, it explains how you live, how you relate, and why certain experiences keep pulling you forward. That's what we need to explore next. Now here's where this gets very personal, because this attraction to quantum ideas isn't just about curiosity. It's about how your inner world is organized, and how it's changing. To understand this, we need to look at the relationship between your conscious mind, your subconscious, and the kind of awareness that sits underneath both. 1. Conscious thinking versus subconscious sensing. Your conscious mind works in language. It prefers clear definitions, linear timelines, a cause and effect logic. Your subconscious works very differently. It operates through emotion, imagery, a memory, pattern association. Most people rely almost entirely on conscious reasoning. If something can't be explained quickly, labeled clearly, or justified socially, they discard it. But if you're drawn to quantum ideas, it usually means your subconscious input is louder than average. Not overwhelming, informative. You sense things before you can explain them. You feel shifts before you can name them. You notice patterns before you can prove them. This doesn't mean you're always right. It means your mind is integrating bottom-up information, not just top-down logic. And that integration is rare. 2. Why these ideas often appear during transition periods. You'll notice something interesting if you look back at your life. Your interest in quantum or consciousness-related ideas probably intensified during moments of identity questioning, emotional loss or disruption, career dissatisfaction, relational shifts, existential curiosity. That's not coincidence. During stable periods, the brain favors efficiency. During unstable periods, the brain favors re-evaluation. When your old mental models stop predicting outcomes accurately, your mind widens its lens. Quantum ideas feel relevant because they acknowledge an uncertainty, a nonlinearity, observer influence, a probabilistic outcomes, which mirrors exactly what your internal world feels like at that moment. 3. Real-life examples of how this shows up. Let's ground this. Example 1. The relationship pattern realizer. You start noticing the same emotional dynamics repeating with different people. Different faces, same feeling. Traditional advice, communicate better, try harder, stops working. You begin looking for deeper explanations, because surface ones don't explain the pattern. Example 2. The career meaning shift. You hit milestones others admire, but something feels hollow. You start questioning what success even means. Quantum ideas attract you because they challenge rigid definitions of value, time, and progress. Example 3. The hyper-aware observer. You notice how your presence changes rooms. How conversations shift when you're more attentive. How outcomes change when you're intentional. Quantum language gives you a framework to think about observer influence, without assuming magic. Example 4. The existential connector. You start seeing themes repeat across different areas of life. Emotional states mirror external events. Timing feels meaningful, not supernatural, but noticeable. You're tracking correlations, not causes. 4. The subconscious is a probability engine. Here's something most people don't realize. Your subconscious doesn't think in certainties. It thinks in probabilities. It's constantly asking, what usually follows this? What tends to happen next? What patterns lead to pain or safety? That's why you get gut feelings. That's why you feel drawn or repelled without clear reasons. Quantum ideas resonate because they align with probabilistic thinking, not fixed outcomes, not guarantees, but likelihoods. This doesn't mean reality is quantum in a mystical sense. It means your mind already works that way. Most people ignore this layer. You don't. 5. Why most people feel threatened by these concepts. Here's the part that often goes unsaid. People who are deeply attached to certainty often feel exposed by ideas that suggest reality is fluid. Why? Because their identity depends on predictability, fixed rules, stable narratives. If reality is flexible, their sense of control weakens. So they dismiss. They mock. They reduce complexity to avoid discomfort. This isn't stupidity. It's self-protection. You're not immune to this, but you're less controlled by it. 6. Quantum ideas as a mirror, not a belief system. This is critical. You're not drawn to these ideas because you believe them. You're drawn to them because they reflect how you experience reality. They offer language for transition, ambiguity, influence, interconnectedness. But they are not meant to replace psychology or reason. They're metaphors, bridges between felt experience and conscious understanding. When taken literally, they become fantasy. When taken symbolically, they become insight. And people who sense this distinction instinctively are the ones who lean in, not blindly, but thoughtfully. 7. The identity shift most people miss. As your awareness increases, your identity becomes less rigid. You identify less with labels, roles, external validation, and more with values, perception, internal coherence. This can feel unsettling, but it's also stabilizing in a deeper way. You stop needing reality to behave a certain way to feel okay. And that's where the real shift happens. 8. Why this attraction isn't random. So let's make this clear. You're not drawn to quantum ideas because you're escaping reality. You're rejecting logic. You want to feel special. You're drawn to them because your perception is widening. Your identity is loosening. Your mind tolerates ambiguity. Your subconscious is active. This attraction is a byproduct of awareness, not a belief choice. And once you understand that, something important happens. You stop questioning your curiosity. You stop doubting your perception. You stop trying to normalize your thinking. Instead, you start integrating it. Which leads to the most practical question of all. How does this way of perceiving reality actually change how you live, how you choose, relate, and move forward without disconnecting from the world around you? That's exactly what we need to explore next. Now let's talk about where all of this actually shows up in your life, because this isn't just an interesting way to think. It quietly reshapes how you move through the world. When you're drawn to quantum ideas, you don't just think differently. You live differently, often without realizing why. And this is where most people get confused about themselves. 1. You stop making decisions based only on certainty. Here's one of the first practical shifts. Most people are addicted to certainty. They want guarantees before they move. Guarantees they won't fail. Guarantees they won't regret it. Guarantees they'll be validated. So they wait. They overthink. They delay. But if you're drawn to quantum-style thinking, something inside you starts rejecting that model. You begin to sense that certainty is often constructed after action, not before it. Instead of asking, "Will this definitely work?" you start asking, "Does this align with the direction I'm evolving toward?" That may sound subtle, but it's huge. You begin making decisions based on a coherence rather than certainty. a direction rather than outcome, an internal truth rather than external reassurance. This doesn't make you reckless. It makes you responsive. You understand that life isn't a straight line, it's a feedback loop. You act, observe, adjust, and refine. That's how complex systems actually work. And once you see that, freezing becomes harder than moving. 2. Your relationship with control changes. This is a big one. Most people believe control equals safety. You begin to realize control often equals anxiety. When you understand uncertainty at a deeper level, you stop trying to micromanage reality. Not because you don't care, but because you see how limited control really is. Instead, you focus on intention, attention, a response. You can't control every outcome, but you can control what you engage with, what you reinforce emotionally, what you walk away from. This reduces a massive amount of internal tension. Life stops feeling like something you must dominate. It starts feeling like something you collaborate with. 3. Your relationships begin to reveal patterns faster. This is where things get uncomfortable, but also liberating. When your perception deepens, you start noticing patterns in people earlier. Emotional availability, a defensiveness, avoidance, authenticity, not in a judgmental way, in a recognition way. You begin to feel when a dynamic is familiar, not because it's healthy, but because it matches an old pattern. And here's the key realization. Familiar doesn't mean aligned. You notice when you're being pulled into an old role, when you're overfunctioning, when you're shrinking to maintain harmony. This awareness doesn't instantly fix relationships, but it changes how long you stay stuck in them. You stop needing dramatic proof to leave. You trust subtle misalignment. That alone can save years of emotional exhaustion. 4. You experience failure as information, not identity. Most people collapse into failure. They internalize it. They personalize it. They build stories around it. But when you think in systems instead of verdicts, failure becomes data. You begin asking, what assumption failed here? What pattern repeated? What signal did I ignore? This mirrors how the brain actually learns, through prediction error. Instead of, I failed, so I'm not capable, it becomes, this outcome updated my understanding. That shift alone dramatically changes resilience. You don't spiral as deeply. You recover faster. You stay curious instead of ashamed. And curiosity is far more powerful than confidence. 5. Your attention becomes a deliberate tool. Here's where psychology and quantum language really intersect. You realize attention is not passive. What you repeatedly focus on gains emotional weight, feels more real, influences your decisions. This is neurological, not mystical. Your reticular activating system filters reality based on relevance. Your emotional memory reinforces what you repeat. Your perception organizes around what you feed it. So you become more selective. You stop marinating in constant outrage, endless self-criticism, repetitive victim narratives. Not because you're avoiding truth, but because you understand what repetition does to the nervous system. This is where manifestation stops sounding magical and starts sounding practical. Focused attention plus emotional repetition equals reinforced perception. You don't attract a different reality. You perceive and act into a different one. 6. Your goals shift from status to coherence. Another quiet change happens here. Goals stop being about proving something. They start being about expression. Instead of, what will impress others? You ask, what feels internally coherent? You become less interested in empty success, performative ambition, goals rooted in comparison, and more interested in depth, sustainability, a meaning that holds up over time. This doesn't mean you stop wanting growth. It means growth stops being compensatory. You're not chasing worth. You're expressing it. 7. You begin living with probability, not perfection. This is one of the most freeing implications. You stop asking, "What's the one right path?" and start asking, "What's the most alive path right now?" You accept that identities evolve, interests shift, understanding deepens. So instead of freezing at crossroads, you move experimentally. You try. You observe. You adjust. Life stops feeling like a test you might fail. It starts feeling like a process you can participate in. 8. Why this way of seeing can feel lonely. Let's be honest. This shift can feel isolating. Not because you're above others, but because you're asking different questions. While many people ask, "What's safe? What's normal? What's expected?" you're asking, "What's true? What's coherent? What's unfolding?" That gap can feel lonely, but over time, it attracts depth. It draws people who can meet you there, not in theory, but in lived experience. 9. The biggest practical outcome of all. Here's the core result most people don't name. You become less reactive, less driven by fear, less trapped by rigid narratives, less dependent on external validation, and more grounded in awareness, adaptability, internal stability. That's the real shift. Not enlightenment, not superiority. Stability through understanding. And once you reach that point, the question becomes very practical. How do you apply this way of seeing, without drifting into abstraction or losing touch with everyday life? That's where we go next. Let's talk about how to use this awareness in a grounded, repeatable way that actually improves how you think, choose, and live. Okay, so now we ground this. Because understanding why you're drawn to quantum ideas is powerful, but transformation happens when you use that awareness in daily life. This isn't about becoming more abstract. It's about becoming more precise. Here are 4 practical shifts that translate this way of seeing into real-world change. 1. The observer shift. Notice how you change what you watch. Here's the thing most people miss. You're not just observing your life. You're participating in it through attention. So start here. For 1 week, don't try to change anything. Just notice what you consistently focus on. Ask yourself, what do I mentally rehearse? What situations do I keep replaying? Where does my attention go under stress? This matters because attention strengthens neural pathways. What you repeatedly observe becomes psychologically realer. Now here's the shift. Instead of asking, "How do I change this?" What happens if I stop feeding this with attention? You'll notice something subtle but powerful. Some problems weaken when they're no longer constantly observed. That's not avoidance. That's neural recalibration. 2. The pattern interruption practice. Break the loop consciously. When you notice yourself repeating a familiar emotional pattern, pause. Not to fix it, to name it. Literally say to yourself, "This is a loop." That single sentence activates the prefrontal cortex and pulls you out of autopilot. Then ask, what usually comes next? What choice do I always default to? What would interrupt the pattern, not solve it? Interruption can be small. Delaying a response. Choosing silence instead of reaction. Walking away earlier than usual. Not explaining yourself this time. You're not trying to be perfect. You're creating variance. And variance is how systems evolve. 3. The probability mindset. Think in directions, not destinations. Most people burn out because they treat life like a single outcome. You don't need to. Instead of asking, will this work? Does this increase probability? Probability of a growth, clarity, alignment, energy. This removes pressure instantly. You stop expecting one decision to define everything. You start stacking small directional choices. This is how momentum actually builds, through consistent probability shifts, not dramatic leaps. And here's what you'll notice. Fear loses leverage when perfection is no longer required. 4. The coherence check. Align your actions with your perception. This is the most important practice. At the end of the day, ask one question. Did my actions today match how I understand reality? Not, did I win? Not, did I impress anyone? But, was I coherent? Coherence means, your words match your values. Your attention matches your priorities. Your energy matches your direction. When coherence increases, anxiety drops. Not because life is easier, but because internal conflict decreases. This is where confidence actually comes from. Not belief. Alignment. What you'll notice when you apply this. 3 things usually happen quickly. First, mental noise decreases. Your mind stops spinning as much because fewer internal contradictions are competing for attention. Second, decisions become clearer. Not easier, but cleaner. You waste less time arguing with yourself. Third, your environment responds differently. Not magically, but relationally. People sense coherence. Opportunities align with clarity. Resistance shows up faster and exits faster. This isn't manifestation. It's systems responding to consistency. Why this works, and why it's sustainable. Because you're no longer trying to control reality. You're working with how the mind actually operates. Awareness creates flexibility. Flexibility creates choice. Choice creates evolution. That's the real quantum shift. Not jumping timelines. Updating internal models. And once you do that, something stabilizes. You stop searching for meaning everywhere. Because you're actively creating it, through how you observe, choose, and engage. All that's left now is integration. Let's bring everything together and close this loop. So let's bring this full circle. All throughout this video, we explored something that feels mysterious on the surface. Why you are drawn to quantum ideas when most people aren't. But as you've seen, it isn't about intelligence, trends, or being more awakened than anyone else. It's about how your mind works. You're drawn to these ideas because your perception naturally looks for patterns, relationships, and deeper structure. Because surface explanations stopped being enough. Because you intuitively sense that reality isn't fixed, it's interactive. Quantum language didn't create that awareness. It gave you a framework for something you were already experiencing. This isn't magic. It's psychology. It's your brain recognizing complexity instead of collapsing everything into simple stories. It's your subconscious responding to ambiguity instead of avoiding it. It's your attention shaping experience in real time. And here's the most important takeaway. Nothing is wrong with you. You're not lost. You're not overthinking. You're not disconnected from reality. You're responding to it more accurately. The real shift happens when you stop questioning why you see this way and start using it intentionally. When you align your attention, decisions, and actions with the understanding you already have. When you stop trying to fit into simpler models of life that no longer match who you are. That's when clarity replaces confusion. That's when curiosity replaces fear. That's when life stops feeling rigid and starts feeling responsive. So here's a question to sit with. Where in your life have you been sensing depth, but doubting yourself for noticing it? If this resonated with you, drop a comment about what clicked while you were watching. Your perspective might help someone else feel a little less alone in how they see the world. And subscribe to Echoes Between Worlds for more deep dives into psychology, consciousness, and the hidden mechanics behind how we experience reality. We're just getting started.